participants here I saw. One of the participants here who I saw is an amazing colleague and expert. Marcy, I saw you here and I'm waving to you, Marcy from WID. So there's a lot of amazing knowledge and power and experience in this group, and the idea is to join hands and help each other. So we will have a more globally prepared accessibility in times of crisis. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you my presentation. And of course, this presentation will be available on our website in English and later on also translated. So you will be able to see it and use it later on. So Purple Vest. Access Israel, I am Michal Rimon, I'm the CEO of Access Israel. Really, in a nutshell, Access Israel is the leading organization in Israel promoting accessibility for people with all types of disability in all areas of life. And please note, access is in our name, but accessibility is not a goal. Our goal is not to be accessible. Our goal is inclusion, true inclusion for all types of disabilities, improvement of way of life, of quality of life. And this is what it's all about in times of peace and definitely in times of crisis. So Access Israel does a lot of awareness raising, legislation, implementation, and a lot of work with technologies. So this is just in a nutshell. And of course, if you want to learn more, if you want to share hands and learn from each other, we'll be more than happy with a great network of international partners from all over the world. Now, leaving no one behind. This is the motto of whatever we're doing and we're talking about today. You remember how in December 3rd last year, not 2022, 2021, buildings and monuments all over the world were lit up in purple, which is an amazing show of partnership and belief, saying leaving no one behind, inclusive employment, inclusive in general, socially. We had the Eiffel Tower, we had the Empire State Building, we had buildings really all over the world lit with purple with that message, leave no one behind. Unfortunately, 3 months later, the war broke in Ukraine. And what we saw is that no matter how much really the world came in and assisted, and both internal assistance from Ukrainian organizations, which were met amazing people doing amazing things, and people from the international community. But in many cases, I never say all cases, but in many cases, those individuals and organizations came to help, but were not really knowledgeable or were not really aware of the special needs of people with disabilities and elderly. And it caused a result of people being left behind. Either they were afraid to be evacuated, or people did not know how to communicate with them, and they did not receive the assistance that they needed. I think that to share with you how we came up with the Purple Vest issue, I got a call right at the beginning of the war from two ladies, a mother and a daughter. The daughter was a blind lady who was in dear need of dialysis, coming all the way to Lvov. A volunteer waited there to take her and take her to the hospital for a life-saving treatment. She was accompanied by her very elderly mother. And unfortunately, because of some bombing on the way, the train had to divert its course, and they did not come to Lvov. They were all the way to Chelm in Poland. The problem is nobody was waiting for them there. Nobody knew how to communicate with them. And I was reached out to, and I had 6 hours to find a solution. And luckily, we did find a solution, and we had a volunteer waiting for them there. And once they arrived in Chelm, they get off the train, and then they contact us and say, how do we know who is coming to help us? The people volunteering did not know how they looked, and they could not recognize that the lady was blind. Her mother didn't really communicate and know what to do. And they were telling me that there were people with vests. I think the Red Cross at the train station, but they didn't really know how to help them, but they recognized the vest. And at that time, I said to myself, you know what, I wish I could just tell her, you see that purple, or your mother can see a purple vest, just go there. Purple is known as a color for people with disability, and this is how this concept started. We took the leaving no one behind and really wanted to make it an issue. And what we did was, our mission was, let's create a task force, a methodology, or not even create. Let's, gather from a lot of amazing information and contacts and things that are already out there and add on to it whatever is needed for accessible management in times of emergency. Let's not wait for the crisis and they say, oh God, what are we going to do with the disabled people? But rather be prepared in advance. That is our goal in the long run. And as I mentioned here, I know Marcy from WEED are doing it all over the world with a lot of success. And it's something that we as a community need to really step up and raise our voices and make sure it is done. And we need to do it on a local, on a national, and on a global level. Now, what is Purple Vest all about? First of all, I have here countries, members of countries that are not dealing at the moment with any crisis. I'm urging you to look at the mirror in this slide. And for those who are not seeing, cannot see, this slide has now a picture of a mirror, an ear, a wheel, and some dots connected by arrows. The mirror is here to remind us all that we're not talking about the crisis they have. The other country, Ukraine, Turkey, maybe a country hit by a tsunami or a hurricane. We are talking about something that can happen and occur at any moment to any one of us in any country around the world. What can we do? Crisis can happen, emergency can happen. COVID hit globally. And that was an emergency. We had to make sure that we know how to deal with it also in an accessible way. So look in the mirror and understand we are talking about something that is relevant to each and every one of us. The ear is also a very basic notion in Purple Vest. The whole idea of Purple Vest is not to come in a paternalistic way and say, hey, Access Israel, we know our stuff. We're going to tell you A, B, C, D what to do. The idea for any person trying to assist and trying to promote accessible preparedness in time of emergency is not just to hear, but to listen to the people on the ground, to listen to the needs, specific customized need of the people of the ground. There are general things that I'm going to share with you today, but we always have to remember that we do have to understand there might be situations we're not prepared for. And listening, not just hearing what the needs are, is what will make us go through this. The wheel is here to remind us we're not here to reinvent the wheel. In each and every country, and I can tell you for the last year or so, I've been working with amazing organizations in Ukraine and in Poland, and now recently in Turkey. Amazing wheels are there in every country. We're not reinventing the wheels. We're not here to send, Superman to help. The idea is to take the amazing wheels rolling in each and every country and just fine-tune them. Provide them with the guidance, with the tools, with the raising awareness, so they won't just know how to help. They will know how to help in an accessible way. And connecting the dots is another very, very important part of Access Israel, of Purple Vest, by Access Israel. Let's make sure that we connect all those wheels that are operating inside one country, inside one municipality, or even crossing the borders, and making sure that the sequence of the accessibility of emergency continues all throughout the process. And we will elaborate on that in a couple of minutes. Now, before we begin, and this is something that I found out when we started this, and it's very, very interesting. This is what I do for the last 16 years. I talk accessibility, I talk disability. For me, it's a daily thing. But it turns out that even the word disability there isn't one definition, global definition of what that means. When we came to Przemyśl on the border of Poland, and there was international volunteers, I think from about 10 countries, each one of them had their own interpretation from their country. So let's just understand between us who I am talking about. People with disabilities compile of 15 to 25% of the world, of the population of the world. Now, disabilities, when I'm saying, I'm including all disabilities, physical disabilities, hearing disabilities, visual, mental, cognitive, and communication. And of course, people who are elderly, we know that at least in Israel, the statistics is that 50%, and I heard in some places 60% of the people who are elderly are also experiencing disabilities in one way or another and need accessibility. And as I'm sure I'm not surprising you, at the age of 99, we will all want and appreciate accessibility. So this is definitely something that is important for a very large percentage of the population. And when people come and ask me, is one thing or another considered disability, I always use the 5-finger test. 5-finger test means that if I cut off my little pinky finger on my hand, then, you know, I might pay for 10 fingers of manicure and get only 9, but that's not really something that will really affect my day-to-day life. This is not a disability that I really need accessibility for, unless, for example, I'm a pianist who need all 10 fingers. But on the other hand, the same disability, if my thumb is now cut off, and that is the one finger I'm missing, all of a sudden, major things, you know, opening a jar, using it for things in the office, at home, becomes a challenge. So always ask yourself, you know, when people ask me if I'm talking to a person who's allergic to nuts, I always ask, is it a pinky allergy or is it a thumb allergy? Is it something that is, you know, too bad, but it's not really affecting my life? Then this is something we can just continue definitely when we're talking about times of emergency. But if it's a life-threatening allergy, it's a thumb disability, then this is definitely something we need to take into account when we're evacuating, not to evacuate and save a person and then take him to a place where his allergy will kill him. So this is the definition, and I know that it's different in various countries, but let's agree that when we are talking disabilities in this session, we are talking about all disabilities, not just physical, not just hearing, not just visual. Also note that there are disabilities that are visible. You can see them. You can see the wheelchair. You can see the maybe on the eyes that it's a person who's not who is blind. You can see many times in the features of the face, or you can see a person with a guide dog or a walking cane. But there are many other disabilities. If I'm not mistaken, we're talking about between 60–70% of people whose disability is non-visible. Whether it's hearing disability, visual disability, cognitive, learning disability, mental, and communicational. And we have to keep that in mind. And from our experience and what you can definitely imagine, when we dealt with people during the war with Ukraine, you know, people who are there in a time of crisis. I'm sure people in Turkey that survived the earthquake, you're on some sort of trauma, and in many cases it becomes definitely a thumb trauma and not just a pinky one, and we need to keep that in mind. So you're not always going to see the disabilities, and many times I was asked, so wait, do I have to give accessible service to everyone, even if I'm not sure that he's with a disability? So my answer to that is, when there's a doubt, it's better that you provide that accessible service to everyone rather than miss out on someone who really needs it and is not receiving it because his disability is not visible. Now, this is a slide where I'm showing all kinds of cases that we had. And we need to remember one thing. When you're talking about disability, I gave now a very broad definition, and I'm talking, titles, physical disability, visual disability, but you have to understand that each person is a story on its own. Each person has their own needs, their own combination of disabilities, of life experience, of capabilities, and we always have to look at it as looking at the person behind the disability. For those of you from the US, in the past, what was the defined term? What was the term used to describe a disability? It was handicapped. Now, what is handicapped? Did you ever stop to think what that word means? Well, it means hand in cap, and I'm showing my hand like a beggar holding a cap, because what else can a person with disability do if not beg? That's the terminology that we use in the past. Today, around the world, we're using the terminology a person with disability. Always look at the person, their story, their needs, and see how we can assist them. Now, why is it an issue? Why do we have to specifically talk about people with disabilities and elderly that need something special in times of the emergency? Well, first of all, we have to understand that this public, it has increased vulnerability and stress from their own situation, from their own disabilities in many times. During times of emergency, and in many countries during day-to-day life, they're lacking a lot of accessible information. And so while everybody else is receiving bits and pieces of information, even in time of crisis, many people who are blind, for example, do not have access to it if it's not accessible. So they are stressed. They don't have the information everybody else has. Generic solutions and generic regulations do not always fit. You know, the best example I have is in Israel, which is considered pretty advanced in accessibility. During COVID, the first months of COVID, the police came out with a regulation that whoever has to be quarantined, the policeman is coming to their house, buzzing the intercom on the bottom of their house. The person has to pick up the intercom, identify his ID number, and then go out to the window and wave so he will be recognized facially. The problem is that is a good solution for most people. Not for the elderly who cannot talk in an intercom and cannot really understand or speak that way, and definitely for a person lying in bed because he's bedridden and or using a wheelchair, and for him to get up and start going to the window and waving is not a solution either. So a lot of the generic solutions do not fit, and we need to make sure that is changed. In many cases, people with disabilities have increased loneliness. Definitely in times of emergency, we had many cases in Ukraine where the family escaped and the parents or the people with disabilities were left behind. And we need to understand that's a situation, the escape mode, everyone to himself, leaving those in real need behind. We have to also understand that in times of crisis, earthquake, hurricane, tsunami, war, lack of electricity, shutdown of shops, essential services, all these can be a real difficulty for people who electricity is needed for their daily, breathing. So that's also added stress and added challenge. It's very difficult to plan ahead and say, okay, I'll start my road and start escaping when I don't know where the end game is. Where am I going to? Am I sure that the place that I'm being taken to is an accessible one? And one important thing that we had occur in many cases was the problem to present signed documents for transfer, especially in those non-visible disabilities. How do we prove, how do we show that we are with a disability or accompanying somebody with disability? All of these are added difficulties, added challenges that we need to take into consideration. So what we did in Purple Vest, and as I said, other amazing organizations have done it also, is basically take three things. One is make sure that there is a task force from wheels that are turning, organizations that are there, and connecting the dots to create a rescue accessible task force for evacuation and assistance in times of emergency. Another thing is in a website, social media, loading on knowledge, loading on all kinds of information that enables you to know in advance what to do or to receive the accessible information on time. And the important thing, and this should be done before and not after the crisis, is of course raising awareness to the Purple Vest Mission way. In 2022, we were very gladly supported by the Nippon Foundation, and we led evacuations and humanitarian aid task force, basically evacuating people with disabilities and elderly, and of course, assisting people staying at home. Today, we are more connecting volunteers and organizations on the ground with training and connection of requests and solutions. Our website also, again, has information. I'm just going to tell you, contact us, go online, sign up for training and see what you can find there. And of course, helping us spread the word, and we'll give more on that later. The bottom line was evacuation of about 4,000 people and assistance for more than 10,000 people. And I must tell you one important thing. When we started all of this, and this is an important thing for each and every one of you to know, I thought that I'm coming to save. I thought that I'm going to evacuate everyone. Whoever wants, I will evacuate. But when we're talking about leaving no one behind, we have to understand what that means. That does not mean taking everyone out, because everyone, including people with disabilities, have free will. And I can tell you, not everybody wants to leave. Leaving no one behind means make sure you're not leaving them behind, even if their choice is to stay behind. And this is something very important. Accessibility is needed in those ways also. So today, what we're doing is really moving a step forward in making this global and making sure that other people, other countries are exposed to the needs, the requirements, and the solutions for accessible solutions in times of emergency. So again, terminology, we spoke about disabilities. Let's talk about accessibility. What is an accessible thing? Accessibility is basically three things. One, the ability to arrive to a place. Once you're there, your ability to receive services, and being there is also a website. You go into a website, can you receive the services that the website offers? And the last thing, when you come to a place, can you use the facilities there? I can give you just a very simple example. When we were in one of the refugee centers in Poland, people got off the buses after, 60, 70 hours on the road. All they wanted was just to wash their hands, wash their faces. The washing sink was operated by your leg. You had to push on your leg in order for the water to flow. And we actually saw a person coming with an amputation in his leg, and he could not use that facility. So that thing that was offered to everybody was not accessible, and he could not do it. And when we're talking about accessibility in the optimal way, it's to have accessibility that enables you to receive all these services safely as equals, with respect, comfortably, and with maximum independence. In times of emergency, of course, we want to save life. We want to help. In many times, it will not be the perfect accessibility, but in order to lay the ground rules, perfect accessibility is this. Now let's find the best solution for accessibility in times of emergency. When we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about three types of accessibility. One is the physical accessibility, which many countries are focused on. Ramps, width of the door. Can we get to a building? Can we go in? Great. Once you're there, you have to have accessibility of the services there. And of course, the social accessibility to make sure that people are more aware of the challenges, of the needs, of ways to recognize disabilities, and of ways to assist. And we have to remember, it's all, accessibility is all about the sequence. You can be the most accessible municipality in the world. Think about a kid wanting to go to school. Everything is accessible, from the parking lot to the way to the entrance of the school, to the main door, to the toilets, to everything. Really perfect accessibility. The library is not accessible though. So if he wants to go with everybody and study in the library, that's one thing he cannot do in the sequence. Or if, for example, the width of the door is not wide enough, everything else can be perfect. But that one thing cuts the sequence and leaves him out of the building. So when we're talking accessibility, both physical and service-wise, we have to always think of the sequence. And it's important to know in advance, to make sure that the sequence is there from beginning to end. Again, remember, this I said the third bullet here is you need to be creative, and perfect is not a goal, but still we need to do the best we can. Take that human factor, takes those people, the people themselves, and make them the human ramp. In many cases, physical accessibility in times of emergency is not perfect, but once you have trained the human people, the human factor, and given them the tools, they themselves can become that ramp. They themselves can make the accessibility of the sequence possible. You know, another important point is the next point that is here on the slide, and that is egos aside. I think that one of the most important thing when we're dealing in general, I think, with disabilities, but specifically in times of emergency. All year round, we're very busy, you know, advancing the needs of our crowd. You know, if I'm an organization for the blind, I want to make sure that everything is accessible for the blind. And if I'm an organization for the deaf, I'll do the same for the deaf. At times of emergency, we have to remember that we need to unite to make sure that the maximum accessibility is achieved for all. And then the human factor will assist in those cases where it's not really there. We have to remember to put our egos aside. This is not the time to now go and really make my, you know, the people that I'm representing only be safe. This is the time to join hands. And I can tell you that in all the areas that we have been active, once that was done, it was much easier to deal with the governments, to deal with the municipalities, and to deal with other people around. And we'll talk about that later on. And when we're recruiting governments or municipalities or managements to the Purple Vest efforts, we have to always present the win-win-win here. It's everybody is a winner once you make sure the accessibility is there. Both the people themselves, their families, those who are here to help and are frustrated when they cannot assist. And of course, the government or the municipality or the organization who are there and want their target audience to receive the services and be safe, etc. We have to raise awareness to this, to the special needs. We have to have a clear, concise message. And again, join hands in that message and not have every organization pull to their direction. Always, it's better to start with the head and really try to convince the heads and have partnership as a common goal. Now, what we did here is we gave here an example of a sequence that we found in Ukraine, but think about, you know, the threats that can happen in your country, both the earthquake in Turkey or floods in other countries that are signed up on here. And we always have to think to ourselves and do this understanding. What is the sequence? How do we take a person with disability or an elderly from point A, which is their home or the place they are at now, to safety? And it can be in the same home, but we want him to be in a safe environment with all the supply he needs, etc. So here we're giving an example of such a sequence that occurred in Ukraine when people wanted to be evacuated. The first thing was information. The challenge was the fact that there was lack of information. People did not know in advance what to do, what to take with them, what is going to happen. And while other people, you know, regular quote unquote people also had the lack of information, at least in their case, it was things that when they come to the various stages of the evacuation process, most probably, just like anybody else lives in that area, they can find food, they can go to sleep in any bed that is offered there, etc. For a person with disability, that is not the case. So information is crucial. Knowing in advance is crucial. We had many cases of people who were offered to go to safety almost all the way till the end, but were not sure regarding what's going to happen in the first or last 2 stops on the way, and they prefer to stay home in a bombarded city. So what we need to do is make sure that we have the checklist prepared. People should get information on what to expect, raise awareness in campaigns, and do that as much in advance as possible and as early as possible once the crisis begins. The second thing is the decision to leave. We have to understand everyone, and especially people with disability, as I mentioned before, our intention are in fear. Our job is to try to lower the tension, to build the trust. Many people come and go and try to help, but come once and that's it. I was told by many cases that, how can I trust the person that is coming to me? How do I know they won't leave me alone? And you really need to make sure you make that trust, build that trust. Listen, as I said, do not just hear, listen to the needs, listen to the fears. Don't be paternalistic, and help plan an evacuation that is customized to the specific needs of that person. Now we have to understand, again, times of emergency, there might be no electricity, and you will have to take the person out of the house because they decided they want to leave. They need assistance. Do they need horizontal evacuation? That requires a whole different solution. Do they have a wheelchair? Is it a wheelchair that is light and can be folded, or is it a wheelchair that is heavy and cannot? And we have to take that into consideration and get the right vehicle for that. Who's going to pay for that vehicle, etc., etc. When you travel from home to the border, in the case of Ukraine, and again, I'm giving this only as an example of the way we analyze the evacuation process, and I'll be more than happy to do so regarding earthquake or any other incident. We have to understand the ride is not always as expected. Things can occur on the way. A 2-hour ride can take 70 hours several times. What's going to happen on the way? Where are we going to stop? Where are there going to be accessible toilets or changing rooms? How are we going to get food, especially for those allergic or those who are on a special diet, life-saving diet? What about medicine, etc., etc.? Now, I can just give you this as an example. When people were evacuated from Ukraine and reached the border in Poland, the process was, at least at the beginning stages of the war, to have people get off the buses, get off the vehicles about between 1 to 2 kilometers from the border. And then they walked to the border and crossed the border. And after that, they found vehicles that took them to the next stop. Try to think about the winter. Try to think about elderly. Try to think about people with disability who cannot do that walk, who cannot travel that, walk that distance of 1 to 2 kilometers, which might not be a big problem for most of the people. We have to make sure that we have a solution, a creative solution. You have to understand that there are incidents of long lines with no accessibility for toilets and no seats on the way. We need to take that into consideration also. And of course, once they get to the border, many times, the people there are not trained. They do not know how to recognize people. They don't believe people who come and say, we have a disability, we need a special assistance, because they do not see a wheelchair there. So again, these are all things that we need to cope with. If I'm going to the stories and to the challenges shared to me by our Turkish friends, then try to think about, and this is just equivalent to what we're seeing, people who were in the rubbles and were not able to communicate, not because of the earthquake itself, but because they have a disability in speech, or because they have a disability in hearing disability, and people did not know how to communicate with them. People did not know how to, once they were found, to calm them down, or people did not know, how to even exchange the first response to them. We need to know how to recognize and how to communicate with people with disabilities, and we'll elaborate on that in a second. When we're talking about border crossing, registration points, when we were dealing with Ukraine, so again, accessibility of vehicles, signs and instructions in the right language, in simple language. Everybody is under pressure and everybody is nervous, but people with disability try to think about autism, try to think about cognitive disability, try to think about elderly or people who do not speak the language well or do not know how to read well. This is something that we need to make sure that is with pictures, simple, clean language, so as many people as possible will be able to understand the instructions that are specifically there. And of course, in the registration points, and again, think about, schools or halls that people in general were evacuated to in Turkey. Think about places that people were evacuated to from Ukraine or from other areas. Were those places accessible when they were chosen? I can tell you that in one of the centers that we went to in Poland, it was a place that could hold 1,100 people with one accessible toilet and 0 accessible showers. What do we do there? We're after such a long travel. We have to stay there for at least a week until we get solutions for evacuations. We need to take these things into consideration. Again, people were focused on people in wheelchairs, but what about people with autism? How are we going to, make sure they are served in an emergency in a way that is accessible for them? So this, as I said, is just an example. You can be perfect in almost all of these stages, but it's enough that one stage will not be accessible, and then you'll have people just giving up, just not starting from the beginning this process, or just going back, and we had such cases in the last year. I can tell you that some people already went through everything, crossed the borders, just to arrive to the other side and understand that none of the vehicles there could take them with their very heavy wheelchair. Eventually, I think the firefighters came and had to crane them up onto a truck. And I can tell you that it took a long time, that they were sitting and waiting in the snow, which definitely was not a good step for them. These are just example of pictures that I'm showing of such evacuations, of again, the human factor coming and assisting, whether in helping, in humanitarian aid, or in evacuations themselves. So just to summarize what we spoke to up till now, we have to make sure that all the stages in the sequence are accessible without reinventing the wheel. We have to listen to the ground, to the challenges, to the requests. We always say, help me, help you. Don't be paternalistic and just go help. You have to, first of all, ask. The fact that a person is old, or the fact that a person is with a disability, does not mean necessarily that they need help. Let's start with the first question. Hi, do you need help? And if so, how can I help you? What is the best way you want to be helped? This is the basic rule. If you'll forget everything I said and just remember one thing, this should be it. Don't be paternalistic, listen, and help me help you. That is the phrase. Of course, the idea is to really take the partners on the ground and create that value, give them that added thing that they are missing, or the needs that they need in order to participate in this accessible sequence. And remember that we have to be creative many times, flexible, innovative, because many things cannot be planned fully. Now, here are some basic guidelines in general, not only in times of emergency, on how to assist a person with disability. And by the way, these things are true always, specifically in times of emergency. The first basic thing is sensitivity, patience, and kindness. I truly believe that we're all coming to this from a good place. Anyone who's coming to assist, anyone who's coming to help is doing it to do good. The problem is that many times they don't know what the best way to do so in an accessible way. Introduce yourself. Give that 2 seconds of introducing yourself, saying who you are, building the trust. You have to see the person as a person, and they have to see you as a person who is there to assist. Don't force your help on someone, as I said. Ask, do you need help? And if so, how can I do that? And please remember, a person with disability and an elderly, they don't want special treatment. That's not what this is all about. They just want consideration. They just want to be considered. There needs to be part of this deal. Talk to a person at eye level as equals. You are not the almighty one who is coming to help and you're from up there helping those below. These are people. Talk to them eye to eye and see what can be done. We said to listen, and we mentioned before the fact that not all disability are visible. It is important to remember, both in times of peace and in times of emergency, always talk to the person itself. Don't talk to the caregiver. Don't talk to the mother if you want to ask a question about the person with disability. Respect them. Talk to them. If they will want the assistance of whoever is standing next to them, they will turn to them. But you give the respect and talk to the person itself. And the common aids, the wheelchair, the walker, the crutches, the canes, the guide dog, don't touch it. This is part of the person. Don't touch it without receiving permission. When we were talking about guiding for accessibility for people with disability and elderly in emergency situation, so we were talking about make sure that when a person is leaving, and of course during the rubbles of earthquake, you cannot really take a bag and pack it, but in other places where there are the opportunities to prepare or to take a minute and grab your things, make sure that the essential equipment, the essential documents are part of what is taken with them. Ask for to help. Do they need help in carrying and holding objects? There are disability where what they're carrying is their security item. They do not want you to take that away. They do not want you to help them carry that, because that is what is making them calm. So again, never grab it. Always ask, do you need help? Do you want me to carry this? It's important to understand in times of emergency, you might stand next to a person who is blind, for example, and there's all of a sudden a big noise. You see that it's nothing. You see that somebody dropped a cup. But for a person who is blind, definitely in times where the nerves are already very stressed, never leave them alone and always describe to them what is going on. Don't worry, that noise was a cup that was dropped. Or please come with me because what the noise you heard is now something that exploded. We have to go away. But always give that second to explain and never leave a person on its own. We had cases where blind people were accompanied by helpers, and then the helper went on to the next thing, didn't tell the blind person. The blind person thought he's there, supervised, and at least has assistance next to him, and then he found out he's all alone. Get as much information as you can about the person himself. And by the way, I see here people writing and all that. We will have this presentation uploaded, so you don't have to write. You can just take it from our website and use it. Get as much information as possible about the medical situation, about the needs, about the essential equipment, in order to be helpful also all the way, and of course at the end destination. Find out if there are any caregivers, members, pets, because there were many cases where we wanted to evacuate somebody to a place where did not accept pets, and that is not a solution for such a person. Make sure that every person involved in the sequence is aware of the needs and relevant details. The roadmap, the continuous roadmap I was talking about, and again, provide as much information and details as possible. Now, and as I said before, respect the person's choice. That is the true meaning of leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind means respect their choice and see how you can help in whatever choice they make. Now, I know that some of the people here are from organizations that are receiving requests by phone. This is a whole training by itself. How do we have an accessible call center? How do we make sure that people who contact us receive the information, receive the assistance in the call center or over the phone in an accessible way? I won't dive deeply into this. If you are such an organization or such a volunteer, or you need this, we'll be more than happy to elaborate once you contact us. But let's just remember, who are the people who can have a problem during a phone conversation? It's people, of course, with hearing disabilities, with speech disabilities. And please note, not everybody with a speech disability is deaf, and not every deaf person cannot speak. So we need to keep that in mind. People with cognitive disability, the phone might not be the right way for them to communicate. People with communicational disabilities, mental disabilities, and in many cases, some elderly. How do you recognize that such a person is on the line? First of all, in many cases, the person identifies him as such a person. I do not hear well, so if you can please repeat what you said, for example. Another way is when a person responds with phrases such as, I don't understand, I didn't hear, speak louder, please repeat, time and time again. That indicates that there might be a problem there, and you have to go into that accessibility mode. Please note, there are disabilities, and hearing disability is a great example of that, where the person himself, herself, do not consider themselves as a person with disability, and still they have a disability. I can tell you, my dad thinks that the acoustics in my house is terrible, and thinks that, you know, my kids are loud. He would never admit that he has a problem with hearing, but he does. And I will not come to him and say, hey, Dad, you cannot hear well, but I will be accessible in the way I communicate and in the way I raise my kids to communicate with him, until he will reach that level of acceptance of his disability. And if you see that the person gives you irrelevant responses, that is also an indication that there is a difficulty there on the call. And what do we do? First of all, introduce yourself. Find out how this person can be helped using, you know, the questions that we prepare in advance for accessibility needs. Understand what is the best way to communicate. You know, a phone is just one way to communicate. SMS, WhatsApp, fax, you know, all these are other ways. If I'm face-to-face to a person or somebody is next to them, even writing down with a pen and paper can be a solution. Find out whether the person is living alone or they have somebody there who they would like them to assist. Again, there are cases where they want to do the talking, and we should respect that and be accessible in the way we provide the services. Again, don't start reading this and don't start copying it. You will receive it. This is just to take it and copy paste. We gave here several disabilities that each one of them might have a problem when we're talking about call centers, whether it's hearing or mental or cognitive or speech or elderly. All of these examples are examples of cases where might be challenges as far as accessibility goes. Each one of them has a way to be accessible. You know, if I'm focusing, for example, on hearing, there are those who think that if you're talking to somebody who's not hearing, let's talk like this. Let's move our lips in very, you know, big way so the person can read it. No, that's not the way. That's not accessibility. People who read lips, read regular lips. If you have a mustache, that can be a problem. So let's try to find a solution there. But people in general should talk normal. Don't speed, but don't talk too slow. And don't overestimate or over-exaggerate your facial features while talking. Don't shout, because people who have difficulty of hearing will not hear better when you're shouting. They'll just hear those syllables which they can hear in a very loud and uncomfortable way. Not too fast, not too slow, not too loud, and make sure that the surrounding is quiet. Try to keep short and simple sentences, and always, as I said before, offer an alternative way of communication, whether it's fax, WhatsApp, or pen and paper. That is just an example of one disabilities. You have to understand that for other disabilities, maybe you need some different solutions. And again, we will upload all this. And at the end, if anybody has specific questions, we will be more than happy to answer. But one of the tips that I can give you that we use many times, and you see it here in the solution for the elderly, a good way to make sure, without insulting a person, to make sure that it registered, to make sure he understood, is to use guiding questions. So you understand what needs to be done now? Do you need any more information? Or really enable him, give him the place and the space to come and ask for more focus or more information. Now, how do we help? How do we assist a person with mobility disability? And by the way, here I'm opening parentheses. One of the things when we met in Vienna last month with organizations from Turkey, one of the things we're talking about in Turkey, that now after the earthquake, for example, many of the people are going to find themselves living in tent cities, tent neighborhoods, which is, a solution that is good in such a, the best possible solution to most people. For people with disabilities, it can be terrible. If you don't have, paved ways that are accessible for wheelchairs or for people using crutches, or if you don't have, the basic facilities, if the transportation to the schools in the morning to the next neighboring city is not accessible for kids with in wheelchairs, they will be left behind. There won't be any solution to them. How are we going to assist in such cases? The last thing we want is to take them back decades to a time where they're left at home, they're left in the back of the tent. And there are countries where that is the reality as we speak today. So when we're talking about assisting and evacuating a person with mobility disability, the first important thing is to really receive information as much as possible in advance, or ask the information. Is your chair heavy or not, foldable or not? Can you make steps? There are people sitting in wheelchairs that can, get up with assistance and make 1, 2, 3, 10 steps. There are those who need a horizontal evacuation or need to be in a horizontal situation at least several hours during the day, as a crucial need for their health. We have to take this into consideration and ask the questions. We won't take such a person to a long ride where he'll have to sit the whole time. That can be life-threatening. So we need to take that into consideration. The need of electricity, if you have oxygen that you need, or any other assistive tool for your health. We need to get all that information in advance. And then with the person, find the right way to help, to evacuate, to find a stability and secure place where they're at. Make sure that the accommodations are made and met. Ask if they need to help carry things. And again, I always say, raise your eyes, raise your heads, look around, see if somebody is struggling. And if so, remember the golden rule. Excuse me, do you need help? And if so, how can I help you? Now, how do we assist a person with hearing disability? So we elaborated on that in the past, a few slides back. I talked to you about the SMSs, the WhatsApp, the reading lips, speaking clearly and slowly, and of course, the writing. I can tell you an amazing story that in one of the cases we were at, a deaf lady came, and I don't know if you know, we have the sign language interpreter, but it's important to understand that sign language is a very cultural thing. A person talking sign language in Turkey is not talking the same sign language in Ukraine or in Israel. So volunteers cannot really communicate in a perfect way if they do not speak the local sign language. And we had a case where a lady, an elderly lady who is deaf, tried to communicate. She was all alone. She couldn't write. She didn't know how to express herself. Here is where technology comes in. And again, in our website, you'll see links and information about a technology called Sign Now. And there are other technologies around the world who can help. Sign Now is a technology, an application where you don't need to register, you don't need to download, you don't need anything. You just need to click on it in the website and receive the sign language interpreter in that language. Usually it takes about a couple of minutes to receive it. That lady in 2 minutes was able to communicate and explain that her daughter is waiting in Bonn in Germany, and all she's looking for is a way to get there. That evening, she was on her way to the daughter. Technology can make a difference. Whoever was at Zero Project heard about Microsoft, about Google, tools that we all know, or many of us know and use on a daily basis. They have features of accessibility. You don't know how to communicate? Use the translator Google is offering. Use the translator Microsoft is offering. Be able to talk and it will be captioned so a person can read it or translate it to another language. The idea is there are solutions. Let's just open our eyes and understand what the need is and what the solutions can be. Communicate any loud noises that are occurring. Think about the fact that a person who is deaf is not hearing if people are shouting, "Run, the fire is starting," or "Beware, the building is about to collapse." We need to understand, look around and make sure that the message that is voiced is registering for those who are not hearing. And this is something very important. Again, when we're talking about preparedness, let's get to know our neighbors. Let's know who next to us needs it on a regular time. And that way we'll be able to help them more in times of emergency. We'll know that the neighbor from downstairs cannot hear. So if now people are shouting, "Evacuate the building," we will know to go down there and grab them and tell them to leave. Or if we know that a person in our work is in need of, he walks slowly or cannot really communicate or whatever, this is something we can prepare in advance. And by the way, the last thing I took out, we were now in the COVID era, all of us, the masks were the most terrible thing for elderly and people with disabilities that have hearing disabilities. What do we do? How do we communicate? And I know that health is most important, but there are ways. There are the see-through mask. It is possible to take out the mask, go a bit farther and talk in a way to communicate. What I did right now, when you're talking, don't use hands, don't cover your face, because people, I love talking with my hands. What I'm doing now is not accessible. People who are trying to read my lips cannot do so if I'm talking with my hands in front of my mouth. I cannot see the title of this. This is with visual, right? Visual. So again, people with visual disabilities, introduce yourself. It is very important to understand. A person with visual disability, in order to survive, he needs order. He needs to know where things are. So if he packed a bag, if the emergency or crisis we're talking about is a crisis where you have the ability to pre-pack, he packed a bag, don't put your hand in the bag and start moving things to help him. That's not help. Ask him how he wants to help, and make sure that anything you do take out, you bring back into the same exact place, or else you're creating chaos for him. in times of emergency. Think about the fame in times where he could not pre-prepare the bag. Think that he does not see the most basic things. You know, a bottle of water to a thirsty man can be waiting there, you know, 2 centimeters away from his hand. He cannot see it. You have to understand that, and you have to convey that to him. Avoid touching the aged, touching the dog without permission. Again, that is something that can just alarm and really add that chaos to him. Again, as we said, do you need help? First of all, don't assume they need help. And how can you help? I can tell you there were many cases of emergency that we dealt with here in Israel, that the blind people were the ones who helped. You know, their sense of smell is more advanced in many times. It's, you know, the compensation on one disability makes you more alert with another ability. And they were the first ones who could smell that, you know, fire is in that direction. Let's run to the other direction and things like that. So we have to really communicate, respect the people. As I said, verbally describe what's happening around, describe what you're doing, so they will understand and know and not just be alert. Now, guys, I'm being realistic. If we're talking about times of emergency, this is not what I said, the perfect accessibility. We're not now going to take long sessions and say, hello, I am Michal Rimon. I am now standing in front of you with brown long hair and a white skin, and I want to now, etc., etc. I'm not going to do that. In times of emergency, I'm going to be short, I'm going to be concise, but still I'm going to be accessible as much as possible. And I trust, again, if you remember the first point that I had in the general instructions, just be patient, be sensitive. I am sure that with those intuition, human intuition, we will be able to overcome the need for speed, the need for quick, immediate assistance, and still be accessible. If there's anything written down, read it to the person, you know, convey it, say it, not just say over there where, which direction do I go? Be clear, explain. If you have to leave, then explain. I'm leaving you here. You are standing in the middle of what? You're standing next to what? I will be back in 5 minutes. Or somebody else will come here and her name is Sarah and she will talk to you. I told her how you look, etc., etc. Be clear. Reduce the anxiety level. Now, aiding people with non-visible disabilities, such as cognitive, mental, or communicational. You know, to make this shorter, I put everything in one slide, although each one is a different disability with different needs. But in many times, the accessibility solutions are common in general, to those disabilities. Of course, as I said before, we need to customize it. So first of all, we need to understand that people with these disabilities, which are not visible, during crisis, many times feel more stress, more confusion, more pressure, anxiety, and added panic. This is what they're dealing with in normal day-to-day life. They're with anxiety, they're stressed. So can you imagine what's going on in times of emergency? Any deviation from routine can be terrible. I can tell you, I can share with you, when we went to one of the centers, for me, when I entered the center, full of people, and you know, they tried to make the kids feel better. So all the kids drew pictures and the walls were full of pictures and with information and flags, and just to look at that, for me, I do not have a disability, you know, on the spectrum or whatever else. For me, it was stressful. For me to see all this, I had to say, stop for a second before we continue. Let's clear it. Let's take down the noise, the visual noise, as well as the noise itself. Let's make sure that people who have that anxiety are able to go to a quiet place, to a clean place, to a place where they won't be overwhelmed even more than regular people, quote unquote, experience that situation. And I can tell you that Also, one of the amazing stories that I always tell, it's not about a time of emergency, but I think it's a perfect story. We do accessibility training in Israel for everyone, for all the service providers, no matter what types of services, emergency or regular. And in one of the cases, we gave such a training to hospital personnel, not just the doctors, the nurses, but also the secretaries. And in one case, a secretary that went through the training was sitting and doing her work. All of a sudden, one of the people there started screaming. Now, usually what would happen was the security guy would come and kick the guy out, because what are you doing screaming? It's a hospital, stop screaming. In that case, that woman did what we spoke about before. She raised her head, she looked, she sensed that there's a problem there. You know what she did? She went to the person, didn't say a word. She took off her high-heeled shoes, which made noise while she was walking. She held them in the hand and marked to the person, come, follow me. And she walked barefoot in the corridor of the hospital. The person later, it turned out, has a mental disability, and he had really a panic attack while he was waiting there in the hospital. He says that corridor for him, with her walking barefoot with the shoes in the hand, and every person on the way, people were knocking, with hammers, hanging pictures, stopped what they were doing. Every noise that happened there, they stopped what they were doing. They weren't instructed. We didn't train them to that. We trained them to pick up your head and look. And he says that for him, that walk was like a walk to heaven. She took him to a quiet room, and he said it was the first time in his life when he had an attack that he was treated as a person. He calmed down much faster, and his experience was something that made him so empowered that he can do it. And that is the human factor. Now, when we're talking about people with cognitive disability, communicative, etc., as I said, show sensitivity, tolerance, and patience. How do you know that there's such a person? They will look confused. They will, act in a way that is not, quote unquote, regular. Does it mean that they're registered, they have a disability? No. But even if you're in a panic attack and you were never a person with disability, considered a person with disability, believe me, the accessible service you're going to provide is going to be helpful. So it's better to provide that accessibility to more people than really need it, and then start testing each one and asking for a proof that they really need accessibility. Speak to the person precisely in short, simple sentences. Introduce yourself and try to calm the person. Now, it is very important when we're talking about people with such disabilities. You have to understand a person, for example, with in many cases with autism. You cannot come and say, can you give me an example of a metaphor? Metaphors are not good for such a people. I cannot say, it's noisy as whatever, fill in the blanks, you have crazy as a dog. It's clear, crystal clear. This is something that is not necessarily understood by people with such disabilities. Make sure you're being very clear, very simple in the way you present things, definitely in times of emergency, definitely when a person is under stress and attack. Make sure that the person understood what you said. After you say it, ask the question, do you understand? Or repeat what I said. It's always better if you have an ability to prepare in advance something in writing, with pictures, with symbols that will make it simpler and easier. Avoid making assumptions. People who have speech disability, don't finish up their sentences. Don't start, assuming what they want to say. Give them the ability to talk. And remember, and this is something very crucial, many times, if you are the first person they're seeing in that sequence, the experience they have with you will affect the entire sequence. If you are not sensitive to their needs, in many cases, they won't want to go to stage 2. They won't want to go to the next step. You have to understand what an effect you have on such cases. I will stop here now. How am I with time? I'm really towards the end. So before I continue to the next thing, I would like to open for a second and ask if anybody has a question up till now that they want to ask. Just before I go to my last two slides about what do you do and how do you become a purple vester. So I'll be more than happy to add on to you if you want to ask someone. You can just unmute yourself or raise a hand, and my great assistants here can help us. Either I spoke too much and you're overwhelmed by everything I said, or I spoke so clear that everything is understood and you don't have any questions. But even if you have questions later on, we'll be more than happy to help. As I said, today is stage one. Today is just the understanding the basics. And of course, we'll be more than happy to give customized assistance as we go on. So if you don't have any additional questions, then going back to the last slide, how do we become a purple vester? What do we do now? And again, the purple vest is, it doesn't have the logo of Access Israel. It's not about Access Israel. What I said to anyone who calls us and anyone who talks to us, it's just a way of making sure people with disabilities know, hey, purple, that's for me. I know that this person has been trained or knows a little bit more than anyone else. And also for the people themselves to identify themselves. Hey, I'm here for you. You need something? I'm here to assist in an accessible way, or at least more accessible than I did know before. So that's number one. If you're an individual here joining us and you want to become a purple vester, then just say, I do. Register on the website. We went through the stage one of really the terminology, the basic understanding of basic needs. You'll receive a purple vest and materials and start ambassadoring it. Start ambassadoring it in your organization, in your neighborhood, in your municipality, in your country. Contact us if you need any assistance. On the Zoom today, we have Katrina, who I think is identified as Katrina. She's the head of the Purple Vest mission. Contact her. Tell her what you need. Tell her what additional training you need, what specific concerns you have, or what specific questions you have. We'll be more than happy to help. And if you're representing here an organization or the public sector, then again, we start by saying, I do. I want to be prepared. I want to make sure that in times of crisis, I know what to do. And then set a meeting with us. And let's map what your needs are. And let's see what can be done. And again, we believe that you need to have in an organization or in a municipality, somebody high up, first of all, taking the commitment and saying, I understand the importance, let's do it. And then we can start customizing what that specific organization or municipality really needs. Now, I can tell you that, again, when we're talking, the war in Ukraine, maybe I was naive when I thought at the beginning that it's not going to last so long, but unfortunately it is. And the situation in Turkey, we know, unfortunately, that even though the earthquakes have now calmed down, because I know there were several ones, even after days and after, I think, even 10 days or 2 weeks, there was still another one, but I think now we're more or less calmed down. Now we are in the aftermath. Now we have to deal with the situation at hand. And we have to understand that when you are now living in those tent neighborhoods, when you are now away from everything that was familiar for you, we have to make sure that we think about the needs in this stressful time. One of the things that came to my attention, and we shouted it out, think about a time of emergency or a time of floods. And Pinar, I see you. I'll turn to you in a second. Think about the focus. The focus is usually on the rubbles. The focus is usually on those buildings that collapsed. What's happening in the building next to it? In the building where it's still standing, but there's an elderly lady who is waiting for that caregiver or that assistance or that neighbor that always used to come and help them. They're not left alone. We had cases in Ukraine of people who, when our volunteers came to them, unfortunately, it was too late. So we need to, again, if we have time to prepare, and those countries that are here to learn in advance to become accessible for times in emergency, let's get to know. Let's get to know the neighbors. Let's get to know, the people, my co-workers. Let's get to know the people or the organizations around me, and understand the needs and be prepared to assist in times of crisis. And I think that is something very important. Pinar, please. And just introduce where you're from, which country, and your question, please.
Hi there, I'm Pinar Gokpinar from Turkey. Thank you very much for this wonderful session. It was really an eye-opener for many disabilities. We are working in an NGO ourselves called Değiştiren Adımlar Derneği in Turkish and in English, Steps That Change. So we are working in our organization with people with disabilities as well. We have about 35% of our members are actually people with disabilities, with different disabilities. And the youth programs that we are doing are also open to people with disabilities. So after the disaster struck in the earthquake zone in Turkey, we have realized that we are not ready at all as an organization, and decided to do things that can make us ready for the disaster, and knowing basically what to do when having a disaster like this. And we started forming groups of people in our organization to work on an emergency guidance, basically. And for that, we would very much need your help. Okay, we have some idea and we are gathering lots of information from different sources, but working with an organization like yours would really help us. As you have said, not reinventing the wheel and using what is there already would really guide us very, very well. So therefore, I would like to probably have a meeting with you for our organization and understand how we can work together. I cannot hear you, Michal. I think you are mute.
This is the most repeated sentence in the last 3 years. Hey, you're muted, we cannot hear you. So I'm unmuted. I can, first of all, gladly, and Katrina will write your name and will contact you definitely. And I can tell you that once everything happened in Turkey, the first thing we did is we took our most basic materials, translated them already to Turkish. So we have them ready. So we'll be able to send that to you. And of course, it's on our website. There are also training videos, and anything you see that you say, hey, I need this, I want this, and English won't work. We have it translated. Most of the things in our website is translated to all languages of the UN. And we added Turkish now for things that were relevant to the crisis. If you see something that is not translated and you want it translated, talk to us. I can tell you that beyond regular interpreters, we used, again, not reinventing the wheel, connecting the dots. We just raised our hand and said, guys, friends at Google, friends at Microsoft, you're all over the world. Can you help? And we got translations within 2 days of everything all organized. So we can definitely assist in that. And we can definitely customize. I will tell you that from my meetings with Turkish organizations, it is so important that the way you will make the government, the municipality listen to you is try to be focused and join hands. Because once every organization comes with their insight and their needs, and each one is pulling the blanket to their, to cover their legs, that is where it's easy for the authorities to say, hey guys, you don't know what you need, so I don't feel obligated to do. So it's very important to, make sure that we're talking in somewhat the same voice on this. Anyone else, guys? Bahar Yavuz.
Yeah, hello, Mihail.
Hello.
I'm Bahar from Turkey, and I'm blind and I'm disability activist in Turkey. But I'm working as a disability specialist in an NGO working in the field of refugee, and which is also responding as a very important factor in the earthquake response in Turkey. I'm sad that you are, starting in this topic. This is really neat, and I know it. I was just I will be including my team members in next follow-up meetings and trainings, and I'm really excited to see other topics. It's really important. And as you know, maybe there are some very important things when we are talking about disability and refugee issues and in emergency setting in terms of communication, for example, because maybe you may already know that in some communities it's not defined and a standardized version of the sign language. For example, they are using home sign in terms of people coming from Syria, since yes, of course there is a Syrian sign language, but most of the time people with disabilities in the communities are using home sign with their community members because of the problems to access the education and the social environment. Is, people cannot go out and socialize. That's why language can be created like with communicating with people, as we all people do for centuries and thousands of years. That's why I think if you are in a way developing some alternative communication methods in terms of emergency times, which is really neat. For example, in Turkey, there is a group of people with autistic people who are self-advocates, and they provided a little information package, let's say. This is for people who cannot communicate verbally and need some signs or some pictures to communicate when they are demanding their essential needs. For example, we are using this tool in the area when we are communicating with people who cannot communicate verbally. So these kind of tools are very important for minorities, because it is a bit easier to talk about majority groups like blind people or people who are using wheelchair. And if there is an advocacy and big advocacy, it is intense in any region, it is much more easier to access the support. But for minorities within minorities, it's much more harder. So I will be looking forward to hear from you more, and I hope we will have a chance to work together in the future, because my also expertise in emergency and disaster and emergency health, mental health program, and I'm originally a psychologist. So I'm glad to meet you, and I'm looking forward to new opportunities for new assessments. And
so everybody, please get to know Bahar. She's a new purple vest expert that is going to assist and share. The whole idea is connecting the dots. The whole idea is sharing. We'll be more than happy. And you mentioned two things that I would like to shortly talk about. First of all, as I said, you are totally right. There are those disabilities, or there are those areas where the pictures, the sign, there are alternative methods of communication. And that is what I said throughout my lecture. If it is possible to pre-prepare visual assistance with pictures and messaging in a way, I can tell you another thing that is very important. In Israel, we do this. In the past in Israel, the deaf community was very, very isolated. There were the deaf and there was everybody else. Nobody communicated with each other. One of the things that we did in Israel, and it's really preparing in advance, one of the things we did was create a project called Pay It Forward in Sign Language. It's not really teaching people sign language. You're not now knowing how to speak, as an expert, but you have those basic phrases, those basic words, that basic knowledge of how to say the words. And I can tell you that part of the people that turned to us were first aid evacuators, were the Israeli equivalent of paramedics that assist. How do you learn the real basic phrases that you need to know in those first 1, 2, 3 minutes when you see a deaf person and you want to just calm him down and say, "You're safe," or "Please don't wiggle, please don't struggle because you can become more in danger." That thing can really be helpful. And again, one of the tools that we made a whole booklet of, I think it was 20 phrases for policemen on, don't learn sign language. We don't expect everybody to know how to sign, but know how to say these 20 words to communicate the basic, most emergency communication needed. So I think that is something that we can definitely share. And let's hear it for the organizations from Ukraine or from the US or from Turkey who do use sign language, and will tell me, "Wait, Michal, here, I'm sending you a link. Here are 10 phrases that I think are important. I videoed myself. Please upload it onto the website." We'll do so gladly. That's the whole idea, to take our efforts, to take our knowledge, bring it together for life-saving information. Tatiana and then Jamie. Yes, Tatiana.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to ask translation if it's from Ukrainian.
No problem. I'm turning on the English translation, please.
По-перше, дуже дякую за дуже практичну інформацію, дуже корисну. І це дійсно вражає, наскільки для кожної аудиторії, для кожних людей з інвалідністю є окремі підходи. У мене таке питання, як в Ізраїлі, чи затверджені ці стандарти на національному, на законодавчому рівні? Чи вони, це ваші організації стандарти, і люди можуть їх використовувати, можуть не використовувати?
Thank you, first of all. And the question is about the standards in Israel, if it's a standard that they are coming at the lower level, or if it's just a standard for the people they are working with, people with disabilities.
Great question, and I will respond. I can tell you, first of all, to all those joining us from countries where accessibility is not part of your law. 23 years ago, Israel was not accessible at all. At all. The truth is we were very latecomers, but very fast runners, meaning in the last 2 decades, Israel has established very, very elaborate laws, maybe too elaborate sometimes, on accessibility. Israel, for example, the training that I was talking to you about, the general's training on accessible services, in Israel, it is mandatory by law for every service provider, not just public sector, every service provider, the restaurant you go to eat at, the school you go to study at, or the cinema you go to watch a movie at. Everyone has to go through training once a year. It doesn't mean that everybody does that, but by law, it's mandatory to do it. Okay, so that is in times of not in times of emergency, in regular times. Just recently, and it was very convenient, just in the last year, we passed the new regulations on accessibility in times of emergency. Unfortunately, Israel also is dealing with crisis and emergency times too often than I would like to experience. And we do have today regulations on how to choose places for refugees to be brought to, the training that people have to go through, etc., etc. So we do have regulations, but what I am passing on to you is basically a combination that combines both the Israeli law that does exist, but not always yet implemented, because as I said, it's new regulations. The experience that Access Israel has, the experience that our partners have, because again, I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm listening and hearing and learning from countries, both developing countries and developed countries that have, you know, found amazing situations and solutions, each one, and the idea is to bring everything together. So yes, we do have laws. Yes, we do have a lot of experience from our emergencies here in Israel. And this is what we're implementing and passing on. But you always have to do the customizations. You always have to do the fine tuning to the needs of that specific country or the specific place you are talking about. I hope that answers your question. The smile says yes.
It's a smile says that I would like to keep talking about this, because it's interesting to know how we can how we can do this, these amazing standards with respect to people with disabilities. And that in Ukraine, every person, every responsible person who helps people with disabilities and it's such an awful situation, still remember about the standards of how to respect them.
Yeah.
So
I can give you optimism. I now spent 5 amazing days with the person in charge of barrier-free Ukraine, Tatiana, from your president's office. And I was very inspired by her determination and her willingness and her striving to find solutions and to make a change. And we are here. We are here to help. We're more than happy. We're reaching out and just contact us, and we'll be more than happy to see, you know, not just how to help you, because this is what Purple Vest is all about, how I can learn from you. I learned a lot of amazing things that I'm now implementing in Israel from Ukraine when we came to assist, and we became assisted by you to be better at dealing with times of emergency. And the same goes for our Turkish friends and the other. Jamie, please. Jamie from Accessibility Accelerator, one of our partners, leading partners for Purple Vest. Yes.
So I'm here to bear witness, not to talk about the rescue. I have been part of this process with Michal since the very beginning. We were on the ground in Poland just a couple of weeks after the war, together with Michal as their collaborative partner. If I were to ask Michal a year ago, can you do a presentation on a PowerPoint, I would say it would be 2 pages long. So this has been an incredible example and a lesson to me from Michal of what it means to be egoless. This PowerPoint presented today, if I didn't have a wall behind me, would blow me right through the wall. It was unbelievable. And I would say that there were certain points that she made that I could tell you where she got it from. So you are talking about a person here who is now an expert, one to learn from. The second thing I will say, and is a very, very painful thing, but it is fact, and I've met with other people who have done the same thing, is the ones in this group, and if there's somebody here from government, I am sorry, but the ones here in this group are volunteers. That's where all the hard work is coming. And that's where all the information that Michal is getting and passing on to us is getting. And the safety and the well-being of the people with disabilities and others has been as a result of the great volunteers. So again, Michal, like a fine wine, you, even though you're still very, very young, you are aging beautifully and you are teaching beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And I don't want to overbear my presence. So unless anybody has a question that they need to ask, what I am going to do, first of all, Katerina, will send everybody who registered, and we have over 120, I think, registered for this session. Some apologize they cannot join, but they want to see the recording. So we will send that to you. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us. If your organization would like to conduct any meeting, we'd love to see that. We are planning to come in person to Polish-Ukraine border next month for face-to-face training, so we can discuss if it's relevant to any of the organizations here. We can discuss a possibility to meet and do it with you. And Turkey, we are here for you. Whatever is needed, we'll be more than happy to either come face-to-face, do digital, whatever is needed. We are all in this together. Today, it's there. Tomorrow, it will be in my house. The whole idea is joining hands and really leaving no one behind. So thank you very much, everybody. And sign in for the Purple Vest. Put in your address. We will make sure that we're sending you out Purple Vests if you are an organization and you have more than one member that you need that vest for. Please let us know, and we will make sure to send you additional ones. If you want to print it out in your place, we can send you the design. Join us. Let's do this together. Thank you very much, and we'll be in touch. And see you in stage 2 of the training. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Дякую. Доброго дня всім.
Дякуємо за сьогоднішній вебінар. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.